Welcome to session 2 of the Prodigal God Bible Study. I am Pastor Tim Burchell from Trinity on Jackson, and glad that you're joining us for this study. Last week, we looked at the 15th chapter of Luke's Gospel in its entirety and realized that for the most part, it is a series of 3 parables that Jesus tells one after another, because he is sitting there having conversation with, common folks. Folks that are described by the religious people as sinners and tax collectors. And they mumble and grumble about Jesus, saying, what kind of rabbi, what kind of holy man could this be who keeps this kind of company? Breaking bread with someone was a more intimate act back then than it is today. It suggests acceptance. It accepts a sense of camaraderie and communion. And so they were critical of Jesus, and then he launches into these 3 parables. Well, I'm going to retell those parables from a slightly different perspective today, and I'm going to have you try to match those up with Jesus' parables. Remember, he tells a parable about the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. Okay, Jesus tells a story. He really doesn't, but imagine. Jesus tells a story about an automotive saleswoman who works in a gigantic auto dealer in suburban Chicago. Now, once upon a time, they were huge. You know why? It's because you didn't have to pay the same sales tax in outside of Cook County than you did in Cook County. I think they've corrected that over the years. But the sales manager is working through inventory, and he discovers that a car is missing, or it's not where it's supposed to be, and no one has seen it for over a week. Now, this particular woman, the first saleswoman in the history of this dealership, was the last one to take the car out for a test drive. So the manager tells her she either has to locate the car on acre after acre of new and used cars, or she will have to pay for the car itself. You know the story. She's out there in the blinding rain, checking colors and model numbers and VIN numbers, while the male salesmen chuckle to themselves. But after 2 entire days, the humor wears off. You see, if she has to pay for a car that can't be located, that sets a dangerous precedent for the rest of the sales force. You can't sell cars if you're out hunting down missing cars. And just as it was getting dark at the end of the second day, a beautiful red BMW comes driving right up in front of the showroom, its horn blaring, and through the sunroof pops the ecstatic saleswoman, and within minutes, the entire sales force is out there to celebrate with her. The lost car is found. The dealer is pleased and impressed with her diligence, and her co-workers take her out that very night for drinks and a celebratory dinner. Now, what parable does that retell? Well, that's the lost sheep, isn't it? The shepherd goes, finds the one lost lamb, leaves all the others untended, and brings it home, and then invites everybody to celebrate with him. Here's another version. Jesus tells the story of a newlywed who is swimming in an Olympic quality, Olympic-sized swimming pool, crowded with sometime athletes, trying to get their 1.5 miles in during the lunch hour. And while doing the crawl, the young man's wedding ring flies off his finger and into the deepest part of the pool. Panicked, he dives down looking for the ring. He dives once, twice, 3 times. Immediately, he calls for the lifeguards to stop all the other swimmers, so the movement of the pool doesn't send the ring down the drain that sits in the middle of the diving well. Though he's not much of a diver, he goes over every inch of that pool until he sees that glittering gold right next to the drain. So with one last long breath, he dives down, grabs it in his hand. And when he breaks through the surface of the pool with his hand stretched out above him, all the other swimmers let out a shout. The young man climbs out of the pool, relieved and exhausted, but thanking God that what was lost has been safely rescued, the symbol of his love for his beloved. Of course, that's the parable of the lost coin. And I can't remember if we mentioned last week when we were talking about the parables, but when this woman loses a coin, we wonder why she is so diligently looking for it. But in those days, it was not uncommon for women to have their dowry, a certain number of coins, put together like jewelry that they would wear on most occasions, keeping it close and safe. And if one of those were to fall off, the question is, would it be enough of a dowry for her to be accepted by her husband or her husband's family? So that coin has special meaning in that context as well. And now there's only one left, so you know this parable already, and it's not a very disguised parable, but it adds a little bit to it, I think. The younger son sells off his parcel of land. He sells it to strangers with no idea what they're going to do with it, no idea how it's going to affect the day-to-day working of his father's farm. But he doesn't care. He wants what is his, and he wants it now, and he wants to take it as far away as he can. Now, there's no reason to suspect that the father wasn't gracious to the younger son as he headed down the gravel road to Old 237 and on to points unknown. It's a long way to anywhere. A young man with money in his pockets, not a single commitment in his heart would go. Well, what we don't hear about at all in this story is what happens after the younger son leaves his father's home. The action shifts to the big city in the far country where the young man spends his money and is what is best translated as extravagant living. But what about back at home? What's Dad and his big brother doing all this time? Now, you kind of get the sense that the older brother is glad to see his younger brother go. Good riddance when his name is brought up. Not a lot of love lost there. There are heavy eye rolling going on if anyone else is in the room, and when the eldest hears his father go on and on about where his younger brother might be and what he might be doing and who's looking out for him so far away from home, and there is just kind of an exasperated sigh from his big brother. But the father is no soft-headed worrywart. He has been around a time or two. He knows what's out there for a young man with a purse full of money and a heart full of, "You're not the boss of me." As long as the money holds out and you've got all the friends and attention you could ever want or need, that's great. But there are plenty of people close to home, let alone in the big city or the far country, that would like nothing more than to separate his son from his inheritance as quickly as possible. A month goes by, and the father starts dropping by the local train station. Now, there's only one train from the far country, and it arrives every night at 9:58 p.m. He comes 10 minutes early, watches the passengers disembark, waits an additional 10 minutes, just in case. He goes home. He sets up a Facebook page, and even a website, fathersname.com, just in case the younger son has access to a computer. Father posts regular updates describing his life on the farm, always mentioning how he misses his younger son, how the family wishes he was home, how the farm hands and himself talk about him often. And before long, the father goes to the train station every night at 9:45 and leaves at 10:15, buys an iPhone, even though he's not a very tech guy, so that while he's on his combine or out with the cattle, he can check his email, Facebook, webpage, just in case, his son may have responded. A few months later, they had a 7:05 a.m. train from the big city, from the far country. And now the father changes his morning routine in order to be there to meet that train as well. He trains someone else to take care of the cows. He asks his older son to hand out the morning assignments with the hired hands. His wife gets up at 5 a.m. every morning to fix his breakfast so he can get to the station by 6:45 and then back there at 9:45 that evening. Understand, this is an every single day of the week kind of thing. With the commitment of a diabetic checking his blood sugar, this father is at the train station twice a day. He keeps thinking to himself what might happen if he wasn't there to meet his son. See, people in those parts didn't have a high opinion of what the young man did to his daddy. It's a small town. They knew all the details, and they disapproved to the point of taking it rather personally. They too are embarrassed, they too are ashamed, and it is no telling what they may say to the father's son to keep him moving on, put him back on that train wherever it is heading, and keep him from coming back home. More than that, the father wanted to be there to wrap his arms around his son and let him know that he is still loved, that there was a place by his side for this young man, despite what he had done. Now think that through with me. The father and his wife are at the neighbor's Christmas party. The festivities are in full swing. In the middle of a good friend's long story, the father gets up, excuses himself, and heads over to this train station. There's an animal in distress at the farm that really needs his experience and care, but it's 6:30 a.m. The animal's going to have to live or die on its own. He's got a standing commitment. There's a blizzard or a tornado warning or a flash flood alert, but no matter how much his wife begs him, he's behind the wheel of his pickup, heading to the bus station, the train station, every single morning, every single night, week after week, month after month, year after year, until that one Tuesday night, when he catches the glimpse of a raggedy, gaunt face that he can barely recognize, even though it has been a face he has been searching for a long time. And the father drops his iPhone, and he runs to his son, and he throws his arms around him and welcomes the one who's self-centered and rude, and yet had had a change of heart, the one who was gone, but who is now back home, the one who was as good as dead, but who has now been brought back to life. These are the parables that Jesus tells, and sometimes if you imagine them slightly differently, or you update them, or you think about them from a slightly skewed perspective, maybe you hear something, maybe you see something that you didn't quite see or hear before. I hope that's the case. Now, you had some reading for this week. Attached to this video was a reading from The Prodigal God. This is the book by Tim Keller. And I gave you excerpts from chapter 3, in which Keller basically says that there are two types of people in the world: those who left traditional morality of family and society, gave up on the moral purity laws, go into the family business. This store was run by my dad and his dad and his dad, so of course you'll run it, whether you want to, whether you're gifted to, whether that's something you're passionate about or not. That's your moral obligation. And they say, no, it's not. I'm going to make my own way. I'm going to discover my own meaning in life. I'm going to make my own choices. They rebel against the traditions, against the religious laws and commandments, so that they can find a more expressive, creative, free way, they believe, to live. He calls it the path of self-discovery. And on the other hand, there are those who practiced and upheld the traditional morality of family and society. Those who believe that the laws of God, the idea that your father and mother know better than you do, who you should marry, where you should live, whether you should take over the family business, it is your legacy, it is your duty, and that those things are to be honored, because it strengthens the community, because it makes everybody around you stronger, and because it's predictable, and because it's how it's always been. That's a good thing. But he goes on to say, and this is a quote, Jesus is saying that both the irreligious and the religious are both spiritually lost. Both life paths are dead ends, and that every thought the human race has had about how to connect to God has been wrong. Because he says the problem with both perspectives, I guess the danger with both perspectives, is they are about me and what I'm going to get, and not about God and what God wants to offer me on his terms. So the younger brother is the path of self-discovery, right? He wants to go his own way. He wants to discover. So he says to his father, give me mine. But what he's also saying is, and mine doesn't include you. Your value to me, Dad, is what you can give me so I can do what I want to do. And that self-discovery creates an alienation from God. And of course, the radical idea that Jesus enters into in this story is the elder brother, who, by the way, does everything right, is still lost to his father. Well, we'll find out more about that, the idea of loss. But the older brother is also, he's doing all the right things, not because he enjoys being at home with his father, not because he loves his dad, but because if he does, he will inherit 2/3 of the estate, because he will be rich, because he will be the heir. He does what he needs to do in order to get from the father what he wants to get. And Jesus says both people are concerned about getting from God what they want, and what the Father wants with each of his sons is a loving relationship. Now, Keller says that the parable is told in 3 acts, and I'm excited to tell you here today that Pastor Tim is bringing back the flannel board. Bum-ba-da-dum. Now this is the father, this is the younger son, and this is the older son. This is the cactus. I don't honestly know if they have cacti in the Holy Land, but it's a dry place, so I thought that would be nice. And here's the fatted calf. Poor thing has no idea what's in store for it, right? So Act 1 does not include the older brother or the cow. Act 1, or the cactus for that matter. So Act 1 is about the relationship of the father and the younger son, and the people, the clients of the father, the people in the village. So the younger son says to the father, give me what's mine, terribly disrespectful, dishonors the father, and surprisingly the father honors the son by giving it to him. And he leaves. That's Act 1. Okay? Now, Act 2 is the son who is in the faraway country who comes back. Act 2 is he comes back and is welcomed home by the father. And the father says, you were dead, but now you're alive. You were lost, but now you're found. Let's kill the fatted calf. Let's kill the fatted calf. Poor thing is going to be on a rotisserie. And celebrate. That's Act 2. And Act 3, get rid of the bucket. Poor younger son is losing his hair. Here he goes. And Act 3 is the father's conversation. The father's going bald right now. No one said the flannel board was easy. Act 3 then is between the father and the older brother. And the father, the older brother refuses to come in to the party and celebrate. this son of yours, he says, who's been with prostitutes, he says, although no one has mentioned prostitutes except for him, right? The older brother refuses to come into the party, and he says, I've been slaving for you. In other words, I have resented every minute I have been in your care. I've been your number one man for how many years, and I've resented every minute of it. You never even gave me a goat so I could celebrate with my friends, and now you've got the cow for the screw-up little brother. And the father says, well, if you wanted a goat, why didn't you ask for a goat? If you wanted the cow, why didn't you ask for the cow? Because here's the deal, my son, everything I have is yours. In a sense, at this point, literally, everything I have will one day be inherited by you. Now, of course, it's mine right now. But everything I have will one day be inherited by you. Come into the party. Because this brother of yours has been found. And we have the opportunity to celebrate. That's Act 3. Now, the last scene of Act 3 is not written. We don't know. Does the older brother join, well, he loses his shoes, but does he join, as does the father, does he join his father and brother with the cow in the party? Jesus doesn't tell us the answer. The truth is, we don't know. And that is, by the way, is to ask, will the older brother, will the Pharisees and the teachers of the law mimic the heart of God, or they continue to resent the grace that's being offered the younger, wayward, prodigal brothers and sisters in their midst? So I want to just close our study by asking a kind of an application question. So if there are two ways to go about life, there's I want to do it my way. I want to set up my relationship with God and my family and my friends and my church on my own terms. I want to craft my own moral code and then do the best I can to stick with it. What does that mean in a time of isolation and pandemic like the one we're in? Kind of a self-discovery or rejection of moral norms and conformity can lead you negatively to things like Mardi Gras. Why is Louisiana such a hot spot right now? Because they went ahead and had Mardi Gras in February, knowing full well that there was a danger from this virus, but it didn't seem like an imminent danger to them, or they had too much invested in this, or whatever it was, or that all these students who went ahead and went to Florida when they were warned not to, when they had already had their schools go to remote learning. There's a New Jersey couple that I read about in the news just a couple of days ago, I think last weekend, had 50 people in their home for a party. After there was restrictions already in place. 50 people and their children in their home. And they were arrested for child endangerment. Their own children were there, and they were exposing them to the potential of the coronavirus. Then, of course, we have those who hoard, convince themselves that they should get everything they can get their hands on. First come, first serve, right? It's me and what I want. I don't care about the standards and the morality of others. I want to make sure I have enough eggs, milk, bread, whatever. They don't ask, really, what would Jesus do? What did my neighbor need? So that's the negative side. The plus side is that you can do a lot of creative and meaningful experiences with your children and your family when you're home, right? Create something meaningful and purposeful out of a difficult situation. You don't have to follow the protocol because there is no protocol for being stuck at home other than the e-learning that needs to take place, right, with your kids. Then everything else is fair game to create meaning. So that is a positive outcome for those who are on the path of moral self-discovery. And then there are those who I will do what's best for myself, for my family, for my community, and for my country. I'll follow the guidelines that are put out by my government. The problem, of course, is what happens when those rules and guidelines vary from day to day. When officials interject electoral politics into what should be a public health situation, or by downplaying the threat or hyping the threat, whose authority do we follow? Whose advice do we put our trust in? With such polarized media today, how do we know? For instance, the CDC for a long time discouraged healthy people from wearing masks. They said it won't help. But several weeks ago, I read a little article, and they made me stop and think, if people are asymptomatic, if there's a 2-week incubation period, wouldn't it make sense for everybody to wear a mask if you're out and about? Well, sure enough, we discover now, a month later, oh yeah, everybody should be wearing a mask when you're out and about. Well, now the question is, where do we get those masks? That's a pretty problematic situation. But wouldn't it have been helpful to have said that a month ago? Right? On the plus side, if you're somebody who wants to kind of conform to the rules, to do the right thing for the right reasons, then you look out to God's authority. I mean, we're followers of Jesus Christ. We look to God's authority. We love one another as we have been loved by God in Christ. We cultivate every opportunity we can find to deepen our relationship with the one who created us, who has redeemed us, and who keeps us going minute by minute, day by day. We try to have that relationship that neither of the sons had with the Father. And yes, God says it quite clearly as well. We act justly in our relationships with others. We demand mercy from those who are in power. And we follow so close to our Rabbi Jesus that by the end of the day, we're covered with the dust and sand that his sandals kick up because we followed him that closely. You see, there's pros and cons in both personality types and both approaches. The bottom line, though, is that whatever we do it because it flows out of our relationship we have, the love that we have engendered for the God of Jesus Christ. And there is room in that for some self-discovery. And there is room in that for thinking through the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. But there is also a lot of value in stopping to ask, well, what does God want? He is the ultimate authority for my life. And he doesn't want, John Wesley said, 3 rules, right? First, do no harm. We get that, right? Then do all the good that you can, in all the places that you can, in all the ways that you can, and all the time that you can. Do good. And then the last, paraphrased, stay in love with God. Nurture that relationship with God. May that be your goal this week. There is another assignment for you. I've got a couple scriptures for you to look at other than Matthew 15. But again, I'd always encourage you to find a new translation to read it out of each week. I recommended that BibleGateway.com if you're not familiar with it. But also another reading from the book. If you don't have this book, I recommend it. It's a very short little book. It's not very expensive, I don't think. Both a Kindle version or electronic version or a hardback version, it would really be worth your while. But I pray for you, and I ask that you pray for me and the leaders of our church as we attempt to try to continue to make disciples for Jesus Christ, always trying to impact, transform, and influence our world toward God's kingdom. We'll see you next week.